But it's so good to see you all. I'm so honored to be here. My name is Lyla June Johnston. Um, yeah, but I should probably introduce myself in the proper way, in the traditional way of my ancestors. So I'm what they call Native American or Indian, but we call ourselves Indigenous peoples. We call ourselves Diné. We're kind of reclaiming our identity from the fantasy and the imagination of American Hollywood movies that have shaped what most of the world thinks about us. Um, but yeah, which means greetings, my relatives and my people. I am from the Nanish clan of the Diné Nation. We are also commonly and incorrectly known as Navajo. Our true name is Diné. That's my first clan, which you receive from your mother. We are a matrilineal people. So instead of getting your last name from your father, you get your last name from your mother in Diné culture. So Nanish means the black charcoal streak division of the red streak people. So yeah, it's a bit of a complicated. That's a whole other story of what those clans mean. But your second clan that you acknowledge is your father's mother's clan. So my father's mother is from the Tsitsis Nation, which is also known as the Cheyenne Nation, Southern Cheyenne. And then the third clan you introduce is your mother's father. So that would be Anshi, my mother's fathers of the Salt clan of the Diné Nation. The fourth one you introduce is your father's clan, the patrilineal line. The first one I did was my mother's mother, my matrilineal line. My fourth and final clan, my patrilineal clan, is of the European nations, including Scottish and perhaps other things that I'm not fully aware of, which is part of the problem here in America. A lot of people don't know who we are because of the jumbling of our identities. In that manner, I present myself as a Diné woman. I'm really excited to share with you my PhD research today. The dissertation is available online. It is called Architects of Abundance, Indigenous Food Systems, and the Excavation of Hidden History. It's called Architects of Abundance, Regenerative Indigenous Food and Land Management Systems, and the Excavation of Hidden History. Way too long of a title, but that's what it is.
No, we get it.
And yeah, so I adapted this speech to be a bit more global, to speak to our common humanity, to speak to our common capacity to be gifts to the earth. And I love to root all of these ideas in concrete examples, because I feel like it's really cute to say, oh yeah, humans could be a keystone species, if we just do this, this, and this, but I think that people need proof. They need to see that it happened before, and they need to know that this is possible. And it's happened so many times throughout the world, throughout time. I would say we've spent more time being a keystone species than we've spent being a parasite. Way more time throughout human history. We have spent a lot of time being very, very advantageous and beneficial to the earth. So we'll get into that. And also when you talk about concrete examples, you also get to show people the nuances of how to do it. When you unpack these concrete examples and you flesh them out, you get to see all the little ways that people did it. And that inspires us, hopefully, to apply that to our land bases, wherever we are. Okay, so let us begin. Okay, can y'all see that okay?
Yes, we see it very good.
Okay, humans as a keystone species, bioregional land management, and the restoration of our true identity. Another way too long title. You know, maybe that's my thing. So I believe that our true identity is to be a gift to the earth. That's what we are designed to do. That these large brains that we have were given to us by the Creator, not so that we could be dominators of the earth, but so that we could be better caretakers of the earth, better groundskeepers, landscapers, facilitators of biological processes. I think we actually have the capacity. We've done it before and we can do it again. So this picture is actually a picture of artist rendition of true archaeological site along the Florida riverbank. And those white piles are oyster shells. Again, this is based off of real archaeological sites we find along the Florida riverbanks here in what we call the United States, but we call Turtle Island. This is just an example of the abundance that was created by these folks. Heaps of oyster shells harvested over millennia. We know through archaeological evidence that people harvested oysters out of these estuaries for over 3,000 years straight without end. It never ended. Not only that, but the oyster shell actually increased in size over time, indicating that they not only didn't diminish the species, but they actually grew the species. Arguably, they cultivated the species. It's an oyster farm. And so this indicates that human beings are capable of sustaining a single food system for over 3,000 years. We have that capacity. If you look at the Chesapeake Bay today, which is where current Washington, D.C. is, that's in a different state. That's in Maryland, not in Florida, but that's where we find the 3,000-year-old oyster farm is in that Maryland, Washington, D.C. area. And under American management, the oyster population has decreased to less than 1% of its original size. So in less than 300 years, we also have the capacity to destroy a 3,000-year-old food system. So it took a while. These are very resilient systems. It took time it took effort to destroy it. It took hundreds of years, but it is now almost completely destroyed. We can bring it back. Of course, we can bring it back if we apply the methods and the value systems that I'm about to share. Okay. So the first one I want to talk about is Native American grasslands pyro management. This is a true concrete example. And what one author had said is the Illinois Confederacy, which is a Native American or indigenous nation, shaped and altered much of this region as an anthropogenic creation. Like many other indigenous groups in North America, their most important tool was fire. Burning the prairies, the grasses hospitable for grazers, and managed prairie as a game reserve to maximize productivity. Now, what does this mean? It means that Native peoples would intentionally apply fire every few seasons, every few years. And what that would do is it would transform all these dead grasses in the fall to nutrient-dense ash. And this ash would bring nutrients into the soil And ironically, you have to burn the grasslands to maintain them. Because if you don't burn, they get overtaken by shrubs and little trees, and they collapse into shrublands oftentimes. And so by burning the grasslands, you're also recycling nutrients faster. So you don't have to wait for it all to compost. It speeds up the composting process. And what you're also doing is you burn a patch here and it regrows for a year. You're burning a patch here, it regrows for, next year you burn another patch. And each patch is in a different stage of regrowth. This patch has been regrowing for 1 year. This patch has been regrowing for 3 years. This patch has been regrowing for 5 years. So each patch is in a different stage of successional regrowth. So each has a different set of flora and fauna. And so you're actually augmenting biodiversity by doing these patch burning, with each one in a different set of animals and plants, a different stage of regrowth. So they actually augmented biodiversity in this manner, which we know also happened in Australia through very in-depth studies people have done. You're also creating nutrient-dense grasslands in the wake of these fires. And that attracts herbivores like buffalo, antelope, deer. And so people think that we followed the buffalo. They don't understand the buffalo followed us. They followed our fire. Because with our fire, we were actually able to expand the grassland ecosystem by keeping the shrubs down, by cycling the nutrients. And it got to the point where many of the plants and animals in the United States became adapted to fire. They needed fire even. Some of their seed shells were tough. They needed fire to break them down, and they were enabled by fire. So the pyro-adapted land systems were a result of thousands of years of burning. Now, burning is so important that in the Miami tribe, the Miami Nation, they have a lunar calendar, and the September moon is called the grass burning moon. So that's how important burning was, is that every September they would say, okay, it's time to burn. So it's even encoded and embedded within our lunar calendars. Each full moon of the year had a different name. Oh, this is the grass burning moon. This is the deer moon. This is this moon, the da 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 da. So the September moon, the grass burning moon, was so important, part of our land management, and which in turn gave rise to all kinds of flourishing of species. And we managed to be a keystone species. I should probably say what a keystone species is, actually. I'm sure some of you may know, but I want to just say it because not all of us may know. A keystone species is a species that upholds an entire ecosystem. It's like a linchpin that enables the smooth functioning of the whole system. So an example would be a beaver. A beaver creates a dam, which creates a pond, which creates an ecosystem, which creates a support system for so many different life forms. So all life is important. It's not to say one is more important than the other. It's just to say that some species have a role that is so influential that it upholds entire systems. And if you were to remove that species, it actually can start to collapse. So similarly with native people, with my people, when they removed us from the land, things began to collapse. The oyster farm began to collapse. The chestnut groves are almost extinct. The buffalo are almost extinct, etc. And so the Miami tribe had a similar role by burning the grasslands. Here's a quote from the tribe, from the nation, in one of their scientific publications. In Spashakolios Kilswa, which is the grass burning moon, we see fire as something that restores and gives new life to the prairie. Fire helps clear the land of old grass and brush and opens seed pods that have fallen to the ground. Because of fire, new flowers and plants emerge in the spring. So fire, ironically, is a life giver. It gives life to the prairie. And it's something that Indigenous peoples across the United States have done to maintain ecosystems. And what's interesting is if you don't burn, oftentimes Mother Earth will take the fire herself. There's an author who I love, and he says, the earth demands her tithe of fire. And if we do not give it, she will take it. So stuff's gonna burn no matter what. It's just a matter of, do we want to make that burning more, do we want to make that burning more productive? Because if we let the grasslands just build and build and build and the forest build and build and build, we have catastrophic fires because the fuel load is so huge that we have these massive fires. And a lot of people think the fires in America, in Australia, are due to climate change. And they are definitely influenced by climate change, but they are more a result of the prohibition of indigenous fires, which actually kept the fuel loads down, kept the trees spaced apart, kept the meadows open, and decreased the risk of catastrophic fire. So there's a really cool book called Forgotten Fires, and it was written in 1908. It was an old book, but it's all about how the United States was burned. Every corner of this continent was burned by indigenous peoples to create grasslands like you see on the right-hand side. This is a picture in Texas, what we now call Texas, but our people have different words for this land. And yeah, so if you look at this exact same place in Texas today, it's covered in shrubs and little trees and big trees, and there's no more grassland there. So the fires actually maintained buffalo habitat and a biodiverse buffalo habitat, I should say. It's not just one species of grass. You have flowers, you have medicines, you have foods, you have all kinds of different important species growing. And so humans and fire and buffalo were three inseparable things. They needed each other greatly. And we fed the buffalo with our fire as much as they fed us. Fire also increases the water filtration rate of the soil. It puts what we might call biochar in the ground. It creates that charcoal base for small organisms that need that little charcoal apartment buildings. Microbiology of the soil is greatly assisted by fire. And it over time, it generates topsoils, up to 4 feet deep. One person in this book mentioned how they saw, this is in the 1800s, like topsoils 4 feet deep in the middle of the prairies, which is largely due to the periodic and systematic burning of grasslands by indigenous people. So interestingly, we find the same thing in Norway. Holocene, Norwegian Holocene pyro management. This was pulled from an article that was written in 2016, which I definitely suggest that you read. It says anthropogenic burning was different from natural fires. The fires set by people were smaller and less intense. They were predictable, almost immediately productive, creating mosaics in a complex pattern of vegetation of burnt and unburnt patches. Because they reduced available fuel, they provided protection against the disruption of natural fires. So these scientists were looking at the Holocene era, thousands and thousands of years ago, in Norway, looking at the intentional fire management that indigenous Norwegian peoples were doing at that time. In the Mesolithic era, which honestly I don't know when that is. I should look that up. But I'm guessing it's thousands. I know it's between 11,000 years ago and 2,000 years ago. So thousands of years ago, there was this same pyro management of Norwegian ecosystems. And these particular authors looked at fossilized pollen records to see the ways in which this fire actually influenced the vegetation of the area intentionally. So you native, or rather indigenous land management, which includes all over the world, right? Is often not just creating biodiversity, not just upholding species and upholding ecosystems. It also was to create food systems, right, for human beings. But there was a reciprocity, and that's probably the key word. If there's anything I can have you walk away with today, it's reciprocity, which I'll explain later. But it's about creating a food system for yourself, right? That's the receiving part. And it's about giving life to the land around you, equally, if not more, as you are fed, to serve the system around you and to facilitate it and play your little part in helping the world flourish. And I think we often see humans as like pests, these like nasty little creatures that are just messing everything up. But I think these examples show how we can be, and we need to be, things that offer an ecological service, an ecological role, just like every other species. We think about the balance of nature is astounding, the ways in which each species has a role, each species has a job, whether it's providing shade and microclimates so that the tree provides, or whether it's dispersing seeds, which the birds provide, or whether it's chewing the grasslands so that it can help create and how we bring animals onto our regenerative farms, how the animals are doing that in the wild, quote unquote, all over the world. They're stomping the earth, they're defecating their poop, and they have their ecological role. And so the question is, why wouldn't humans have an ecological role? Why would every other species on the planet have a role, but we wouldn't? Now that doesn't make sense to me. As Native people, we believe Creator doesn't make anything on accident. There's no mistake. Everyone is here for a reason. Every rock is here for a reason. Every tree, every star, every deer, every bird, and every human has a purpose here. If we can just remember what that purpose is. So moving on to Bolivia. This is another interesting example of keystone species, humans as a keystone species. So in Bolivia, the Baude indigenous nation does this floodplain aquaculture. So their role in this system is to take a floodplain, which during the rainy season floods, right? And during the dry season, it recedes. And they're taking these floodplains and they're transforming them into extremely biodiverse, productive gardens of Eden. So on the left, you can see it's like a funnel. So when the waters go up from left to right, and then when they recede, this funnel will catch the water and will catch fish. And they have a plug here so they can actually plug it and unplug it. And this is an ancient earthworks. They would build up earth to create like berms, canals, settlement mounds. And along these berms, along these earthen walls that would kind of funnel water one way or the other, they would plant fruit trees. And these fruit trees would attract game animals for them to eat. And so they have also a lot of snails. And so it's this very biodiverse food system, literally tons of snails, apparently, a lot of escargot, food, fruit, fish, so it's a very abundant food system. They would create forest islands, kind of build up the land, build up the earth to create agroforestry. They had built up the earth for their settlements. They had ring ditches. They had canals for transportation. They moved the earth in these really profound ways, kind of like a beaver, but just very complex beaver. And they had these fish weirs, these fish funnels, which would drain into gigantic pools, reservoirs. So they'd have year-round pools and year-round supplies of fish. Even in the dry season, they would catch the water, catch the fish, and kind of hold them there so that they could have a year-round supply. They would raise the dirt to create their fields for agriculture. So this is a very complex, very beautiful system that flourished in the about 2,000 years ago up until about 500 years ago, when the Spanish came and pretty much destroyed the entire Baude population. Um, so here's an aerial view of some of the berms that they would create, massive earthwork projects that would funnel the waters to and fro. This is the area that was managed. This black dotted line is the basin that was managed, which to me is just incredible. And there's a really cool book, 1491, that my friend wrote. I'd really highly suggest it. But Charles Mann. But he says at the point of contact, when Columbus came to America, the biggest cities in the world were not London and Paris. The biggest cities were in South America. These were massive cities. And it's proof that to manage that amount of river basin, it takes a lot of people. So there was huge population densities, and not in a way that was depleting. It was in a way that was actually regenerative. It was a system that supported lots of people, but did so sustainably. I'm just gonna do myself a time check because sometimes I start talking and then okay. So so anyway, that's Bolivia. That's this example of human floodplain management, where peoples would really create these gorgeous systems. The next one is in my homeland. It's what they call a Shiwi or Zuni runoff agriculture. Or it's also called alluvial agriculture. So basically, you have this watershed, right? And you're gonna plant, and we're from the desert, right? We're a desert people. I'm from what we call New Mexico. We call it the Neta. So you have this watershed, and you're gonna plant your fields at the base of the watershed, because that's where you're going to catch all the monsoon rains. And interestingly, what comes down with these rains is not just water, but also fertilizers, nutrients, potassium, phosphorus, nitrogen, soil organic matter. And so the reason is because up on the hills where the rains come down are full of forest litter, different little organic materials that flow down with the rain and nourish your field. So we plant corn, beans, squash, tobacco, amaranth, other crops. We find some of these fields were planted over 1,000 years ago and are still productive. So there was no need to import outside fertilizer or outside irrigation. We just dovetailed with nature. We go to where nature is already providing those things. And I have a field planted outside in my farm here. We planted it right where the water drains, because that way it's gonna be watered all the time, and it's also gonna have these nutrients flowing into it all the time. So this is another picture of the alluvial fan, the watery, sandy fan that comes down, and we would plant right here. Create little dams maybe to slow the water down. Not big dams, ever big in industrial size, but just temporary dams to slow the water down. So this is a really cool example because it basically shows that without any outside fertilizer or irrigation, people in the desert created gardens by working with the natural topography of the land, the natural altitude changes of the land so that they could actually harness the natural bounty of the earth. And some even say to plant more corn than you need, plant enough for the birds, plant enough for the animals, and in that sense, you can be a keystone species as well by planting food for everyone. Hold on one second. I'm taking care of my grandma, and so sometimes she needs help just making sure she's there. Okay. So that's the alluvial agriculture I wanted to talk about. The next example is eel farms in Australia. So Australia is home to many, many brilliant people. The indigenous people of Australia are way beyond most of the cultures the ways in which they would work with the land, their cosmologies, their worldviews. They've been through a lot. They've been tortured by colonial forces, had their children stolen from them. They've been decimated. Tasmania was almost completely depleted of indigenous peoples. There's a lot of healing that needs to happen there. But there's also a lot of honoring that needs to happen, honoring these folks and what they created. So what you see in front of you is a 6,000-year-old eel farm. 6,000-year-old eel farm by the Gunditjmara people. This eel farm, eels are a species that they go from freshwater to saltwater. So they will spawn in the sea and they will return to the freshwater to mature. They're the opposite of a salmon, which will spawn in freshwater and then go to the saltwater to hang out, mature, maybe find a wife or a husband, and then go back to the freshwaters to settle down and have kids. But anyways, the eel go back and forth, up and down the rivers, up and down the tributaries, and that's part of their job, is to bring nutrients back and forth from the salt to the freshwater. So what the Gunditjmara people have done for 6,000 years is they catch the eels going up and down the tributaries. They funnel them into little pools. They funnel them into certain areas. And they have a year-round supply of eels. And they also arguably are cultivating these eels because they will be very careful which ones they select. They're gonna, when the first eels come, you let them swim on because those are the strongest, right? You want them to continue to breed and whatnot. Maybe you'll take the slower eels as food, and in that way, they, in a sense, kind of shaped and strengthened the eel population. So same with the salmon, when the salmon would come, we always let the first salmon go. You take the last salmon. And when you do that for thousands of years, you do influence the genetic strength of the salmon population. So anyways, on the right-hand side is a little grass woven eel trap. You trap the eel in that thing and it swims into it, and then you have eel for dinner. Apparently they're very delicious, but it's more than just a food source for them. The eel are what they say, if you look at the literature, they say the eel are our relatives. They are our people, and we must take care of them. We must protect them because they protect us and they take care of us. So it's really about reciprocity and love. And as you can see, yes, they did eat these eels, but they ate them for 6,000 years, indicating that they never depleted the population. They never over harvested. They were respectfully harvesting the eels. So going on to another place in Canada, this is where they submerge their tree boughs into the water, and they plant kelp. They hand plant fast-growing kelp. This is the Healthsuck Nation, the Healthsuck Indigenous Nation. the herring farms. So basically, you put a whole bunch of plant material. I almost said substrate, but I'm trying not to talk too silly. Okay, so plant materials, which will actually have these little silver fish will lay their eggs on everything, right? So this young man is holding up the hemlock. It's a type of pine tree. And when they submerge these thousands of tree limbs in the water, they create more surface area for the herring to lay their eggs. Caviar. And so they also will plant these massive kelp forests. They create kelp forests, How cool is that? They create their own kelp forests. And the herring, of course, will lay their eggs on the kelp, and that creates what they call spawn on kelp, another delicacy of their people. So with their bare hands, they are augmenting the herring population. They are very important not to take all the eggs. One thing that a health-sick woman said in the literature is, she said, the most important part of the harvest is what you leave behind. Most important part of the harvest is what you leave behind. So there's a regenerative nature to this practice, whereby they leave enough eggs behind that can hatch and create more herring for the next year. They also leave behind a lot of eggs for the bears, for the salmon, for the killer whales, for the eagles up the food chain. The herring provides the caloric base for the entire coastal ecosystem. So these little eggs are so important that their new year starts in February when the herring come. That is their new year. Everything revolves around the herring. So it's a very beautiful system. The last example I'll share is in the Amazon. These are Amazonian dark earth. The Mebengokre, the Kayapo people create these soil systems by doing a lot of complex composting, intercropping, a lot of burning, putting their ceramics into the soil. And on the left-hand side, you could see this black topsoil. All of that black horizon of soil is man-made over thousands of years. The clay, the brown clay soil horizon underneath is what the Amazon normally looks like. The Amazon has extremely nutrient poor soils. So on the right-hand side, every black dot is where they found this composting system, a regional composting system. This is not like a cute little garden. We're talking an entire watershed being influenced by this kind of soil creation. Anthrosols, they call them, man-made soil systems, woman-made, people-made. And in the middle is a Mebungokre man showing off his dark, loamy soil that he and his ancestors have created for thousands of years. And so it has a lot to do with inputs, termite mounds, burning, any crops that you harvest, you'll burn the leftover plant material. Like if you harvest corn, you're going to burn the rest of the stalk. And so the Amazon River Basin owes its very nature to human intervention. This picture on the right is, I don't know if you can see this red square, but that's like a good chunk of South America that was influenced by human hand, And a lot of people don't understand that the Amazon rainforest that we all know and love and fight to protect is in part man-made, by indigenous peoples, by these eco-engineers, if you will, by these keystone species that created with their bare hands these Amazonian dark earths, these terra preta soil systems that provide the base not only for their crops and their agroforestry, but for any living being that wants to set root in that area is benefiting from these soil systems. So to me, it's just mind-boggling how how capable we are as a species of flourishing life, you know. And perhaps this is why you may have heard this statistic before, but indigenous peoples comprising only 5% of the Earth's population, I mean, and define indigenous peoples defined as peoples who've been in their homeland for thousands and thousands of years, but oversee 80% of the world's global biodiversity. So this very small population is overseeing 80% of the world's biodiversity. And only 5% of the global population, at least the people they surveyed and the people they defined as indigenous, you know, I know that's a complicated topic, but only 5% of the world's population overseeing 80% of global biodiversity. So this is how we can be a keystone species, by learning from these cultures, the ways in which they do it. So on that note, and I know I'm out of time, but I'm just going to run through a few more slides. One of the things I like to share is the metaphor of the bird bath, right? The bird bath is a human creation, right? And it is a service to a species outside of our own. It is a gift to birds. And this is what I believe we need to start doing. It's a metaphor. I'm not saying everyone go out and make a bird bath, although I think that would be great. I'm saying, you know, everything that we do can be a gift to a species outside of ourselves. We can be givers to humanity and beyond humanity, to all species. And just like the eel farmers, they're not just farming the eels for their own benefit. They feel a responsibility to take care of these eels, to put effort in to creating a home for them that is sustainable. And so how can we do that? How can we look at certain species and build them a home? Similar to the buffalo management, we built them grasslands. We built entire prairies for them with our fire because we wanted them to eat. We wanted them to have space to roam, to run. We wanted to participate in this dance of life with them. And as much as they fed us, and they fed us clothing, shelter, you know the story. We would use every part of the buffalo. They're sacred to us, very sacred, super sacred. Just as they fed us and gave us all these things, we in turn wanted to feed them as much as we could and take care of them. So the main takeaways are habitat expansion, right? All of the examples I showed you today, right? A lot of it's about expanding habitat for other species, reciprocity, holistic management, which is kind of the same thing as landscape scale management. You know, we don't look at little oyster farms. We're managing whole estuaries. We're not managing little, you know, cattle farms. We're managing whole prairies so that these grazing animals can eat. Millennial scale, you know, these are thousands of years old, and they prove to us that indigenous peoples the world over, including indigenous Europeans, were able to create these really old, long-standing food systems. Consent and free will based, none of these systems really had a lot of like caging or ranching or farming. They were really more about creating a home for life, and then life chooses you, chooses to hang out with you because you're not a freeloader, you know, you're contributing. Stewardship mentality, you know, this notion that we are here to be warriors for the earth, warriors for other creatures, warriors for the world. And that's who we are deep down, before the trauma, before the witch burnings, before the Roman expansion, before all of that BS, you know, that's who we are. And I went to those caves in France last month, 2 months ago, with the paintings, 17,000-year-old paintings of buffalo, ibex, pregnant women, and horses. So this was the only thing that they painted for some reason, 17,000 years ago. And this was the gift that they wanted to honor. And one of my little friends said, if these people were so primitive and stupid, how come they can paint better than us? Like, yeah, they're gorgeous paintings. Like, they're like really pretty. They're like, whoa, these guys must have gone to art school or something. Okay, values: respect, reciprocity, reverence, responsibility, relationality, equality. Not just equality between men and women, which we've started to tackle, patriarchy. Not just equality between white folks and brown folks and black folks, which we've started to tackle, racism, but equality between all species, not that is human supremacy stuff. No, like we are all equally important. Why would a human be more important than the rest? It doesn't make any sense. Of course, the Bible tells us that, right? But I think that the perversion of what the creator was really trying to say is not you are the master of creation, but you are given this brain to be a servant of creation. And in that sense, you have the power to master creation, but use that power with compassion, use that power with wisdom, and you can create beautiful things. I'm not going to go over that right now, if that's okay. I'm not going to do that one either. Actually, that's from the old version of the slide. So I'm going to leave it right there. Respect, reciprocity, reverence, responsibility, relationality, equality. Those values are the heart of a successful human system. And without those values, it doesn't matter what technologies we have, doesn't matter what cute little things we create. If this is not the heart of our design, we're not going to change in a significant way. This is the rudder of the ship, your values. That is what's going to steer us to the right direction. Okay, I'm going to stop talking now. I'm a bit late, sorry about that. But we have 7 minutes for Q&A or anything we'd like to share.
Thank you so much, Lyla. The whole room is filled with a sense of love and calmness somehow, and I believe also with lots of questions to you. So I will have a look around in the room and see, is there someone who would like to share a reflection or a question with Lyla? No?
Thank you so much, firstly, for sharing so many different perspectives and solutions. And I think that the whole talk of Indigenous knowledge can bring a lot of sense of discomfort in people and guilt. And what I love about the way that you've shown knowledge that we've lost that we can go back to is that you really bring a sense of hope and concrete examples. So thank you for that. My question to you, maybe more US based, but also other examples in the world. What do you think can help people change their perspectives that have grown up in a Western environment, don't really have a connection with cultures that are inherently embedded in nature, to have that mindset shift or change?
Yeah, I wrote an essay that I would love your feedback on. It's called Reconnecting with Our Indigenous European Roots. And I think that's what can help people the most, is to help them understand this is who your ancestors were. They were not primitive. If anything, they were more advanced than us, than we are today, because their value system was more civilized. It was more about, there's a great book called The Chalice and the Blade. And this woman documents archaeologically how Europe went from a chalice culture of abundance, community, celebration, to a blade culture of fortification, defense, war, etc. And so we can see in the archaeological record how this shift happens. and it's fear-based, right? It's when we let go of fear, everything will flourish. So I think, to answer your question, I really think that that we need to show people that indigeneity is not exclusive to brown people, that this is our people, all people, and to do more research, you know, that and concrete examples that shows this is who we are. I think we get so lost in this thin wall of time that dominates our understanding of Europe, right? King Louis, Napoleon, Alexander the Great, those guys are just the surface. There's like hundreds of thousands of years of history beyond them that is arguably much more interesting and much more instructive. And for instance, they found a figurine in German soil in 2009 of a woman, the Venus, right? We see this Venus all over Europe. And she radiocarbon dated to 40,000 years old. Now, this is how long our ancestors in Europe have been shaping the earth into the shape of a woman, to honor the sanctity of women, to honor the sanctity of the earth. We are earth people. There's just this thin little wall of time of history that is blocking us from seeing the roots of who we are as Europeans. And so so I don't think it's beyond our reach at all. I think what we need to do is reclaim and recover the parts of us that are true. So I don't know if that helps, but that's kind of my thoughts off the cuff.
Yeah, thanks for your answer and inspiration.
Thanks a lot for your question. Is there anyone else who has a question?
Thank you very much. Wonderful presentation. My name is Elko. I had a discussion recently with a manager of a top scientific institute, and I asked him the question: how do you see indigenous knowledge in getting things across? And then he started to argue about peer review and etc. You know, it has to be scientifically based, and you know, you have to have at least a PhD before you can do any research in the Arctic, for instance. And yeah, indigenous knowledge is, yeah, it's okay, but it's knowledge, and so I was wondering how you how we can influence that sort of community, because you know, science is often the base for policy developments. And yeah, I thought there was a sort of he wasn't really taking indigenous knowledge seriously. Is that a challenge for you?
Well, white people and white science has been in the driver's seat of global policy for a few hundred years now. And how is that going for us? Yeah, you know, speaking of empirical evidence, how is that working out for you? It's not working. It's destroying the planet. And so, you know, I think this brother is a remnant of a fading paradigm, frankly. And the proof is in the pudding, you know. If these systems worked, you know, the oyster population would still be here. If these systems worked, the Great Barrier Reef wouldn't be slowly being destroyed. If this way of thinking worked, this reductionist, mechanistic, desacredized way of thinking worked, would we be in this situation today? Absolutely not. And so conversely, the proof is in the pudding. If 5% of the global population is overseeing 80% of global biodiversity, you know, what more evidence does he want? I don't understand. And he, of course, he has the privilege as a white man, I'm assuming. And I'm also white, so I also own my own white privilege. But he has the privilege of saying, of being the arbiter of what counts as knowledge. and everything else is folklore, everything else is ethnobotany, everything else is science. And why though? Because it's not in a peer-reviewed journal, it's not science. But what's funny is, okay, he wants us to have a PhD. Okay, I got a PhD. Sure. If they need a PhD, just go get a PhD, go do it. And then you can, and then they'll listen to you. So that's also why I got the PhD, so that I could just say, look, I know your system. I went to your best universities. I understand it. Now let me share with you the ceremony of my people. Let me show you what we've been trying to tell you for 500 years, but we didn't have the right words, But I honestly wouldn't worry about him too much, because there's another, this is the last thing I'll say. There's another geneticist, Ludovic, top geneticist in Europe. He's working with a Lakota woman who got the Marie Curie Fellowship, and they're doing horse genetics together to prove that there were horses here before Columbus in the United States, among other things that they're testing. So there's a lot of European lab managers who are very, very open to Indigenous knowledge and are seeing that they will be stronger and wiser if they integrate that. So definitely check out, Yvette Running Horse Collin, who has been in Europe now for 2 years as a Lakota scientist and is making waves and changing the world with bringing her people's knowledge into the picture.
Thank you.
Thank you a lot.
Thank you all. Thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here, and I really wanted to be there in person, and Felix and know that, and I hope someday I will in the future. So thank you all for your time, and I just really believe in each of your abilities to help change the world. So don't give up, keep doing what you're doing, and know that there's some lady in New Mexico praying for you all and hoping the best for you all. So
Thank you, Lyla. I have one final question for you before we're going to move on, because I believe that you're going to stay with us a little longer, isn't it? Because you're going to host a workshop later this afternoon. So maybe, would you like to share one word, or a couple of words, with the audience on what you want to talk about with them in your workshop?
You seem to be muted now, Lyla.
Yep, sorry, too tired. Okay. I wanted to talk about, creating alliances between Europe and Turtle Island. What does that look like? What does that feel like for you all? And yeah, just kind of trying to create some kind of alliances between us so that we can be less alone. As Native people in the United States, we feel very alone, very isolated. This country has abused us for 500 years, and they continue to abuse us. They continue to isolate us and marginalize us. So we're like, we're just going to skip talking to American government altogether because they don't listen. Let's go talk to Europe. Let's talk to them. Let's go over their head and start forming these alliances. So that's sort of what the ACT Shop is about.
Amazing. Thanks so much for clarifying. And thanks so much for this wonderful inputs.